I'm Jennifer Rooks, and this is Maine Calling. After the shootings in Lewiston, the questions keep coming. Chief among them, what can be done in terms of Maine law to prevent gun violence? Well, today we are going to talk about state gun safety measures and what changes might be in store. Joining me, Representative Victoria Dudera, who is Maine State Representative and co-chair of the Gun Safety Caucus. John Reed, who is owner of J.T. Reed's Gun Shop in Auburn, and David Trahan, Executive Director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. Of course, as always, we invite you to share your comments and questions by email, a brief email, please, talk@mainepublic.org. You can comment on Facebook or Instagram or give us a call at 1-800-399-3566. And please note that today's program can be viewed live, and you can access American Sign Language interpreting and captions by going to Maine Public's YouTube channel or Maine Calling's Facebook page. Before we go to our guest for the hour, I want to talk to my colleague, Kevin Miller, who is Maine Public State House correspondent. Kevin, you have been reporting on the intense focus on Maine's gun policy since the mass shootings in Lewiston. What are the top issues being discussed statewide?
Well, obviously, there's been a lot of focus about what should have happened before the shooter committed the mass shooting in Lewiston. A lot of questions about what police knew, why they didn't take action to perhaps remove guns from him before they had a chance. Maine has a yellow flag law. I'm sure you'll get into this into the conversation, but Maine has a yellow flag law, different from a red flag law, but that does allow police to go and seize guns from someone who's believed to be mentally unstable and is posing a threat to themselves or others. That didn't happen in this case, even though the fact that family members and members of the Army Reserve had actually alerted the police of the fact that his mental health was deteriorating and he was making threats against people and even against this Army Reserve base in Saco. So I think that's going to be a major focus. We're also going to see kind of a repeat of probably going to see a repeat of some of the debates we've had in the past. Questions about expanding background checks, questions about whether there should be waiting periods on guns. But also there's going to be a lot of debate, I think, on mental health and whether Maine needs to step up its support for people who are suffering from mental illness.
What are we hearing? We've heard from Representative Golden, who's changed his mind on a very sort of big part of his philosophy on gun laws and changing his mind about assault weapons. What are we hearing from Governor Mills?
Well, so far we've heard that Governor Mills has said she's open to any and all ideas about strengthening Maine's gun laws, but she hasn't been specific, and I think that's something that maybe you can get into later in the program, because some of the players who are going to be involved in that discussion are obviously going to be here on the program. Governor Mills has been fair. She's a Democrat, but she's been fairly conservative when it comes to gun policy. She's resisted calls in the past for expanded background checks. She's pushed back against some of the other gun control measures that have been put forward by members of her own caucus. But and she played a huge role in the negotiations that led to Maine's yellow flag law, which is different from the red flag law. So I'm sure that's going to come up again. But so far, she said that she's open to conversations. There's the independent commission that's looking into what happened during the shooting, and I'm sure they may have some recommendations, but so far we don't have any specifics from the governor.
What are you hearing among Maine citizens, Kevin? What's word on the street? Do you feel as though there's a shift in attitude?
Well, I think there's an interesting dynamic here in Maine and across the country, really, where it does seem like the public is more in support of some gun control measures than politicians are, especially when it comes to background checks. There's usually pretty broad support for background checks expansions. That said, we did have a referendum in 2016 where the universal background check proposal did fail, and I think that there was a lot of concerns that were raised about how it would impact Maine's hunters and kind of the sporting culture. But I think since Lewiston, I think one of the biggest things I'm certainly seeing and we're hearing is this concerns about if police knew that there were all kinds of problems with with the gunman. Why didn't they step in and try to take his guns before this happened? There were all kinds of red flags that were going on. And they actually did have an opportunity. They did go to his house to try to contact him, but they didn't go further. So I think there's a lot of frustration among the public that if we knew he was having problems, if we knew that he had access to all these weapons, why didn't police do more to step in?
Okay. And I know that that is being studied. There's a Blue Ribbon Commission trying to figure out what went wrong. Today on the program, we are going to focus on really on the legislature and what might happen. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Kevin Miller, Maine Public State House correspondent. Before I talk about, though, any potential bills, any potential new laws, I want to turn to you, John Reed, and just have you give us a little bit of an education. I think there are people in Maine who know a great deal about Maine gun laws, and then a great number of people who don't know anything. And so I just wanted to start by asking you, if somebody walks into your store and wants to buy a firearm, what is the process? What do you as a gun shop owner need to do?
We are highly regulated by the federal government, which requires anybody that comes in to have a picture, current picture government ID showing exactly where they live, the date of birth, the name, so on and so forth. They have to fill out a background check. It's a form 4473. And on that form, they give the name, the date of birth, the height, weight, all the personal stuff. They answer questions as to whether they have ever been mentally adjudicated deficient, if they are the actual buyer of the firearms. There's a bunch of questions on it. We then take that information and feed it into the federal government, who comes back with us. They have three different things they can say. They can say proceed, they can say delayed, they can say denied. The law specifies that the federal law specifies that you have to be 18 years of age to buy a long gun, a rifle or a shotgun. Handguns, you have to be 21 years of age. They do not discriminate against any calibers. Can be a 22, 45, but these are the guidelines that we go by.
All right. Have you seen, I understand every time there's a mass shooting, there right away afterwards, there's a surge in gun sales. Have you seen that? Have you seen more people coming into your store since the mass shooting in Lewiston?
Yes. And this one was totally different, though. Yes, in the past, we have seen what they call an assault rifle. People coming in buying assault rifles because they're afraid that there's going to be a ban on it. This has been totally different. People coming in now are realizing that it's up to individuals to protect themselves and their loved ones, and they're taking it far more seriously. What we're seeing, it's not an assault ban or anything. Individuals coming in saying, law enforcement can only do so much for us. We've got to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. By God, we're going to do it. They're buying firearms. They're doing it competently. We have a handgun safety course here. If they're not already proficient in firearms, they say, we're coming to the course. They're taking it serious, and they're taking it upon themselves now to protect themselves and their loved ones. That's what we're seeing this time around.
A couple more questions before I move on to the other guests. One of the reasons that Representative Golden did not one of the reasons he gave prior to a couple months ago to not supporting assault weapon ban was the difficulty in defining an assault weapon. Of course, now he's changed his mind about that, but we do know that there was a federal assault weapon ban in the past. So, John, I was wondering if you could sort of walk us through that. When somebody uses the phrase assault rifle, what do you think it means? What did it apply to when there was a federal ban, and what is being sold in your shop and in other shops today?
Yeah. The quote unquote, and again, talking to individuals around here and listening on the radio, assault ban, I still don't understand what they're talking about, but I believe it's like AR-15s, AK-47s. I believe that's where they're going to. What individuals don't understand is that you take an AR-15, that's a 223 round, okay, and they can have 30 round clips in it. Well, you take a 12 gauge shotgun with a 3-inch buckshot in it, that's going to do far more damage than an AR-15. But we don't talk about the shotguns. I at a
I think people are probably talking about them because over and over and over again, they are the weapons that are being used in these mass shootings. And so, and the last thing, and Vicky and David, I promise I'll get to you all in just a minute. But John, I wanted to ask you, when people do come in and buy, I mean, and buy these weapons, why are they buying them? I think everybody in Maine understands why somebody has a hunting rifle, and people understand why someone might have a handgun. Why are people buying these AR-15s and AK-47s? What are they using them for?
It very much is a sporting rifle, and yes, you very much can hunt with them. They need a 5-round clip, which is designated by the state that you can't have more than a 5-round clip hunting. But you can hunt with these assault weapons. It's if you're going to have one firearm, a lot of people go to the quote unquote assault weapons because you can do so much with it. They're great to target shoot with. It's not expensive. You can hunt with it. It's an all-purpose firearm. Why they go to it.
All right. So I'm going to turn to you, Representative Dudera. I know that you would like to see these guns not legal in Maine. Tell me what it is that you're hoping to introduce in this upcoming legislative session, what you believe there's support for in Maine in terms of changing Maine's gun law.
Well, thanks, Jen. And, I want to start right off with saying I appreciate being a part of this really critical, important discussion. And I'm really glad that John is on the program because I feel like gun shop owners in Maine, really can play such an important part in keeping Mainers safer from guns. We know that we have a high rate of suicide here in the state, and suicide by firearm, more than 50% of the suicides are with guns. And, there are programs in place in other states where gun shop owners are actually kind of trained to see the warning signs of suicide. And so I'm really glad that we're having this discussion and focusing on safety. As to the specifics of what we're going to be doing, I know, there's a lot of things on the table that we're talking about. I certainly feel like closing the loophole in the background check law would be very, very helpful in Maine because, one of the things we hear people say is, well, we'll pass these laws, the bad guys will still get the guns. And there's some measure of truth in that, in the way that, in Maine, you can get any kind of gun you want in a private sale, and there's nobody doing the kinds of checks that John is talking about he does in his stores. So, I certainly hope that is going to be part of the discussion. I also feel like we had talked about waiting periods. That is something that has been known, to be helpful in suicide prevention in other states. Other things that we've talked about in the past, like the bump stock bans, those might be things that may come into play. But we're just, we're at the point right now where we're really still gathering information, looking at what the federal might happen federally, and thinking about what's best for the state. Because we know, I'm somebody that comes from a culture of hunters, rabbit, duck, deer hunting. I understand that in Maine. I understand people who like to shoot for recreation, and I understand people that collect guns. I've got all that in my family going on. So I get that. But I know that it's not contradictory to believe that we can put laws that will keep us safer from all kinds of gun violence, on the books.
David Trahan, I know that you've met with Governor Mills in the wake of the Lewiston shootings to talk about possible actions to address gun violence. Are there certain areas of agreement as you look forward to this legislative session? Do you see places in which the governor, you, and also gun control advocates see eye to eye?
Well, we've been doing that since Governor Mills took office. Pretty much all of the gun safety measures that have passed during the Mills administration, from the Maine School Safety Center to yellow flag to the straw purchase legislation last year. We have worked with the governor's office and the legislature, safe storage. All of them came from our organization, and we were a part of passing them with broad bipartisan support. So we've already got a history of doing that. Nothing's changed. We have respect for the governor. She has respect for our organization and our community. So I see us working together. I do think we're having the wrong debate, or we should be having a much broader debate. Right after the Lewiston shooting, I read both police reports in which you've been referencing that involve the military, New York, the police in Saginaw County. And both of those police reports revealed that it was almost a year that this man was not only showing his loss of mental capacity and his more violent behavior. He committed some potential crimes along the way that for some reason, everyday folks would have been arrested for, and he wasn't. When he was in the military, he punched a fellow soldier who told him to stop talking about mass shootings. He made multiple threats against military facilities, which are felonies. And this is going to be important, Representative Dudera, as we move forward. The second report was what's called a welfare check. That was after Mr. Card had potentially committed 2 felonies. I question why that wasn't an arrest warrant and a search warrant. Had they done that, he might have been in custody for a potential yellow flag.
So David, let me ask you this. I mean, I completely understand, and so many people have so many questions about everything leading up to this, and there is a Blue Ribbon Commission, and our congressional delegation has called for investigations into what the Army knew and released, and these are all very, very valid questions. But today we're talking about guns, and they've been, even with all of those missed, I think most people agree that if the shooter had a handgun, there would not be so many people dead.
Sure. Well, I was the one who asked Senator Collins to submit for the IG's investigation just a week and a half after the shooting, as well as the federal legislation that's being proposed by Senator Collins came from us as well. So we're engaged in that process. I have no problem talking about guns. The reason you're having such a hard time defining assault weapons is because it's a political term. It has been placed on certain semi-automatic firearms that have been legal for 100 years, been in existence. Automatic weapons, which the gun control community likes to call military grade or military firearms, they've been illegal since 1934. They were, again, before 1986, they were made illegal to own anything beyond 1986. So military grade firearms are already illegal. It's very difficult to own them and very expensive. What we're talking about are semi-automatic firearms that look scary. Every firearm that's semi-automatic works the same. One trigger pull and it fires once. And John Reed was correct. They are used, AR-15s are used for coyote hunting, some limited deer hunting. AR-10s are used for moose hunting, caribou, deer, and bear. So they are used, and they're in broad public ownership. We believe any assault weapons ban as proposed by Senator Angus King and Congressman Golden have slim, if any, chance of getting through Congress and likely would face constitutional challenge. So that really is just, I think, a political debate right now and would be limited on its application and maybe never even take effect. Getting back to Representative Dudera, the waiting period that she mentioned, in the federal legislation that passed recently, I was engaged in negotiating components of that, and I presented to Senator Graham, Collins, and Golden, Representative Golden, that we should include juvenile records when doing the NICS background checks for mental health checks. I was the one who first proposed that, and it was implemented. That instituted a new waiting period for 18 to 21-year-olds to a week, up to a week. There are already waiting periods, and so I'm very familiar with that and the other components of that bill. In addition to the other proposals, the expansion of background checks, it's not as easy as just expanding background checks as she proposed. We do background checks at our organization for private sales. The problem is that the government needs to create a system to retain records, like a comprehensive gun owner registry, in order to conduct state background checks. That's illegal under the NICS system for the federal government to do that. And a few years ago, the provision that allowed it for the state to do it, I know because I presented the legislation to create that database, it was made illegal as well in the state. So it's difficult. It's multifaceted, and it's a very difficult policy when the public doesn't understand what they're voting on.
We're talking about gun laws on Maine Calling. We do need to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Listener.
Welcome back. This is Maine Calling. I'm Jennifer Rooks. Our topic today, gun safety and gun laws and what may change in Maine in the next legislative session. With me today, John Reed, who is owner of JT Reed's Gun Shop in Auburn, David Trahan, Executive Director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, Vicky Dudera, who is a representative in Maine's House of Representatives and co-chair of the Gun Safety Caucus. Share your comments and questions. You can send an email, talk@mainepublic.org, comment on Facebook or Instagram, or give us a call at 1-800-399-3566. And important to note, today's program is streaming live with an ASL interpreter on Maine Public's YouTube channel and Maine Calling's Facebook page. Joining us on the line now, Nicole Palmer, who is Executive Director of the Maine Gun Safety Coalition. Thanks for calling in, Nicole.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us.
All right. So we've been talking, I'm sure you've heard what's been said so far. And given the complex matter of these potential changes in Maine's law, what do you believe is possible? What is on the table? What would you like to see happen in Maine's next legislative session?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, it's clear that Maine is falling behind other states in the country who have enacted sensible gun safety legislation that is effective in significantly reducing gun violence and in keeping our citizens safe. We can look at Vermont as a state demographically similar to Maine, with a rural character, a culture of gun ownership, and strong hunting traditions. For years, Vermont, like Maine, was cited as an example of a state where lax gun safety laws were presumed effective. And then in the wake of a near tragedy in Vermont, a bipartisan group of legislators led by the Republican governor of Vermont, Phil Scott, passed a package of gun safety measures that have significantly reduced the likelihood of future gun violence in their state without infringing on the rights of responsible gun owners. And we know that gun owners in both Vermont and Maine care deeply about gun safety.
So, Nicole, given that, what has happened, for example, in Vermont that you'd like to see pass in Maine specifically?
Well, the four priorities of ours this year are measures like background checks on all gun sales, which, by the way, has nothing to do with a registry. Your earlier speaker was incorrect about that. All of our neighbor states have enacted background checks on all gun sales, and they do not have registries. An assault weapons ban, a 72-hour waiting period, and a real red flag bill. Those would go a long way to reducing the everyday gun violence that Maine has dealt with for many years, and in reducing the likelihood of another future mass shooting like what we saw in Lewiston on October 25.
Well, thank you.
Sorry.
Nicole, I'm sorry. I'm trying to pick up the pace. We have so many people calling and so many people who want to say something. I want to thank you for calling. Nicole Palmer, Executive Director of the Maine Gun Safety Coalition. Vicky Dudera, what Nicole has talked about do you believe is actually possible or likely in Maine's legislature, knowing your colleagues?
Well, I think, a lot of hearts and minds have changed. So I think a lot more is possible than has been in the past. And I'm really glad that Nicole brought up, a true red flag law, because I believe that that's an area where, we are seeing police saying that the yellow flag law as it stands right now is clunky and cumbersome. A true red flag law would be easier to implement, would mean that families can go to judges rather than having to go to law enforcement. Police custody isn't needed. So there's a lot of things that we could do with a true red flag law rather than the law we have now. The other thing I just want to say, gun deaths are preventable. This is a public safety and public health issue. They're preventable. So the more laws we can put in place that really can prevent guns from getting into the wrong hands. And, David mentioned safe storage. In 2021, we passed a law that I sponsored to keep guns out of the hands of children under the ages of 16. The law that Dave's talking about that he worked on is to make September Safe Storage Month of guns and drugs, which is helpful too. I mean, that's definitely something we need to talk about when we talk about safety with guns, is locking them up securely so that people can't get them who shouldn't have them. But those are the kinds of things. And I think we're going to see, I'm hearing good things from people. I'm hearing people have changed, that folks who haven't voted for this kind of legislation before know that we're not immune from it now in our state, and we need to do something.
John, I want to turn to you before we go to the callers and ask you, is there anything that would be helpful to you as a gun owner? I'm certain that you don't want to be selling firearms to people who are going to commit, heinous crimes. Is there anything that the Maine legislature could do to help you?
Okay. There are enough laws on the books now that simply that we don't have the manpower to enforce. Making new laws, not going to do anything. If they took the laws that are in place now and went by them, we'd be much, much better off, okay? They don't have the manpower to do it, law enforcement, so on. The federal government a couple of years ago changed the 4473 forms. They have a section in it now that says, is this transaction to help facilitate a private sale? And what that means is that if an individual is selling a firearm to the next door neighbor, they bring the firearm into my gun shop. I register it coming in from the person selling it, and I do a background check on the person's going out, and I check the box, okay, that this is to help facilitate a private sale. That's a great law. It's not a law, but it's something that individuals should be taking more advantage of. Yes, the gun shops charge for that. Yes, I get $30 for it, okay? When you're talking about a loophole, again, this is something that I don't understand what politicians are talking about when they say loophole. Individuals selling firearms have the same rules and laws they got to go by. They cannot sell a firearm to somebody underage. They cannot sell a firearm to somebody who's a convicted felon. They cannot sell a firearm to somebody from out of state. They're liable under the same laws as I am, okay? There are a lot of individuals out there that are selling firearms to people that shouldn't have it. Can't question that. Can't question it. Can't question it. If we had enough law enforcement to go after them, would make a big difference. Again, there's enough laws on the books, enforce the laws we have before you go out and make more laws that isn't going to do anything.
All right. I'm going to go to Rich, who's calling from Moosehead. Hi, Rich. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. And I just want to make the point to everybody that you're more likely to be protected from a violent crime by a person with mental illness than you are to be a victim of a crime from a person with mental illness, because it's proven that people with a mental illness are more likely to be a victim of a crime. And in my case, I protected the citizens of my community in a criminal ski lift operation, and my mental illness was used to cover up that crime.
Rich, thank you for your call. And this is a point that comes up whenever we're talking about yellow flag laws or red flag laws, that a lot of, there are many, many, many people who have diagnosed mental illness. Vast majority of them are never going to commit a serious violent crime. And I think there is some frustration. I sense frustration out there that a certain number of people always talk about mental illness when we talk about gun violence. And I'm wondering, do any of you have a response to Rich?
I'd like to jump in because I'd like to talk a little bit about red flag versus yellow flag. We at our organization, our lawyer, I negotiated a lot of the so-called yellow flag. Yellow flag is, again, a political term. It's actually a weapon restriction order. Most every state has them. We use that system to capture dangerous people. We see a typical red flag law as severely weakening the public safety net. I'll give you an example. In Massachusetts, they have a red flag law that's been in effect for 5 years. It has been initiated 57 times in 5 years with 7 million people, and it's been successful 38 times. In just the last year and four or 5 days, Maine's yellow flag law has been used 103 times. And the reason for that is that our law, it takes an individual who may be suffering a mental health crisis and appears to be a danger to themselves or others, and it allows police officers, which is something that's been around for decades, to take them into protective custody with probable cause. That individual then is connected to a medical assessment to confirm it, and then a judge that issues the taking of the guns or weapons. Why that law, I think, has been so effective, and the criticism from, I might get to the police part of criticisms of this, because it's very frustrating. The reason that's so important is that that entire system has the highest levels of due process for the people taken into custody. And Representative Dudera and others who want to make it easier, it takes 6 to 7 hours. When taking a person's personal liberty, their freedom, any freedom, it should be difficult for the police to do it. But the law has been used very aggressively over the last year because it wasn't fully implemented prior to that. The telemedicine component was not in place until Spurwing as a contract.
David, I want
to let Vicki have a chance to respond, and then I want to move on to talk about guns. But Vicki, go quickly, and then we're going to move on because
we need to make it easier for families, David. We need to make it easier for families who realize that they've got folks in crisis. The poor families of the perpetrator of the Lewiston crime, they knew. I mean, my heart breaks for them. And if it could be an easier, more streamlined process for families to be able to go to a judge rather than have to go to the cops, and rather than the cops themselves are calling it a cumbersome process, I think we could save more lives. It's great that the yellow flag has worked in some instances. It's wonderful. Great. But let's streamline the process. I do want to just respond to the caller who called in, your caller, about the mental health issues. And I want to assure him that, you know, we take funding for mental health services in the legislature very seriously. We last year took significant steps to invest in it. We invested millions of dollars against addiction, mental health services, and community-based services. And I wish this was a bipartisan issue, but it's not. It's Democrats that are funding that. But thanks.
I want to go to Joe, who's calling from Portland. Hi, Joe. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm a pediatric hospitalist, and I was working at CMMC the night of the shooting. And since that time, I've been really focusing my advocacy on this issue. You know, because the type of weapon and ammo that was used in a shooting and the devastating injuries they caused, over half the victims who were shot that night died due to their injuries. And nearly all of those who died never even made it to our hospital. And as doctors, you know, all of our major medical associations, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Surgeons, they've all independently researched this issue. And they've all concluded that enacting things like extreme risk protection orders or red flag laws, expanding universal background checks, and restricting civilian access to assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines would help to address the gun violence epidemic in the country. So I'm just wondering if, you know, Mr. Trahan is open to any of these recommendations provided by our country's public health experts.
Well, first of all, let's say how tragic. I can't even imagine what it's like to be working in a hospital and to witness something like this. But what I would say to your caller is that I am working on it. There will be a federal piece of legislation introduced requiring the military in all branches to notify the states before releasing a person like Robert Card. And in those states, use their red, yellow, or any other color order that they have in their state on an individual like this. That will save lives. If you want to avoid an incident like Robert Card's in the future, that should have been resolved months before that. He never should have had a gun to conduct this. That's the place where our system failed, and that's where our organization will put our very significant influence in the coming months. As far as the other initiatives, they come before the legislature every year, and they're promoted by the Gun Safety Coalition every year and in all the states in which they participate. We want to look at what happened throughout the New York military and police, and then fix the problems where they happened.
Joe, thank you so much for your call. We do have to take another quick break. This is Maine Calling. We'll be right back.
Listeners.
Welcome back. I'm Jennifer Rooks. You're listening to Maine Calling. We are talking about Maine's gun laws. Joining me, David Trahan with the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, Vicky Dudera, State Representative with the Gun Safety Caucus, and John Reed, a gun shop owner. The name of the shop is JT Reed. Join our conversation, 1-800-399-3566. I'm going to read a couple emails and then go to a call. This is a comment from Melissa. Regardless of the laws that we may need for gun control, we need better enforcement of the laws we have now. Being someone who has dealt with domestic violence, I've seen law enforcement be blasé about the enforcement of these laws. And then another perspective from Mark, police don't prevent crime. They stop crime as it's happening and investigate it after it happens. To increase gun safety, we should give mental health and social workers the authority to remove weapons from possible offenders. I'm going to go to Suzanne, who's calling from Nobleboro. Hi, Suzanne. Go ahead.
My husband's health took a downward turn, and so he was sent to Marshview Senior Center in Lewiston. While he was there, as he was dying, sadly, everything was put on lockdown, which was just outrageous. We had to pull down the window curtains, lock the windows, be escorted down the hallways and so forth and so on. The staff could not enter or leave the facility because of the lockdown. It was, I've been a peace activist for many years and intend to be in January on the 3rd. I'm 92 years old. I can still drive. But the fact that my husband at 88 should die during a lockdown while someone is running around Lewiston killing 18 people is just incomprehensible. And we need to do everything we can to keep these military weapons out of the hands of anybody, not only mentally ill people. But a lot of people who commit these crimes are not mentally ill. They've got a grudge or something or other. But to have people armed and killing little children in classrooms, and I am a retired teacher. So this is, I'm voicing my outrage that my husband should die. Luckily, we were with him. Otherwise, he would have died alone.
Suzanne, I'm so sorry. And thank you for calling in today. Vicky Dudera, response to Suzanne.
Yeah, I want to echo what Jen has just said. I am so sorry, Suzanne, for your husband's loss, and I'm glad that you were with him. I think you've hit the nail right on the head. We're putting guns before people, and people are what we should be talking about, and we should not have to be afraid of getting shot, whether we're in our churches, in our supermarkets, bowling alleys, schools, whatnot. So I want to tell you that, I'm committed to making Maine a safer place, and many of my colleagues are as well. So I think we're definitely going to be working on it. We got your back.
Suzanne, thank you. An email here from Kevin. For me, this is just a math problem. The more guns, the greater the chance of getting them in the wrong hands. The question is, what sacrifices are gun owners willing to make to compensate for the lives lost to gun violence in our society? David, I'll put that to you.
Well, the previous caller, you wouldn't be human if you didn't feel horrible about what happened with that family. As far as, can you ask that question again? And I want to be clear how I answer it.
So I'm reading from David.
Yep.
He says, the more guns, the greater the chance of getting them in the wrong hands.
Okay.
The question, what sacrifices are gun owners willing to make to compensate for lives lost to gun violence in our society?
So the question asks law-abiding citizens to give up their rights to firearms in the hopes that we would reduce the amount of firearms out there in the public. That is pretty much what all of the gun control legislation does, is it takes the law-abiding citizens that are out there and says, are you willing to give up a portion of your freedom, your liberty, so that we make our community safer? Maine is the safest state in the nation as it relates to violent crime. And so I would ask, are we trying to go after or target the bad guys here? All of the legislation that we work on is targeted toward bad guys. And you asked Representative Dudera about legislation to be introduced. A year ago, I had offered, it took me quite some time with our attorney to draft a statute that the Democrat leadership didn't seem to even want to talk about. And that was to create a dangerous person statute. Joseph Eaton also murdered people in Maine just a year ago. And what we had proposed was through the governor, and I believe she would have been okay with introducing it, but it was rejected by leadership, was to create a statute and define what a dangerous person is. If you've been convicted of a crime that prohibits you from having guns, when released from prison, you would have a higher level of scrutiny where you were going to ensure there were no firearms or dangerous weapons. For some reason, they didn't even want to talk about that. But I think, that's first in the nation and it's cutting edge. It's targeting potentially dangerous people. Same way with these shooters. We have gun-free zones that we promote all over the state of Maine. The federal government at the post office has armed guards in their gun-free zones. Why can't we talk about other things besides what the gun control community puts on the table? And if Representative Dudera and others want to talk with us, we would love to talk about other things that we can all.
Okay. David, Vicky, quickly, we have so many emails coming in, so I want to let you all both
David, I've sent you a bill. I sent you a bill 2 months ago to look at that I want to collaborate with you on. So go through your inbox. It's a suicide prevention bill.
I'd love to talk with it. I'm researching that bill, Representative, and when I'm ready, I am kind of distracted with all this other stuff, but as soon as I have a chance, we can talk for sure.
Great. I'd love to collaborate.
All right. So I'm going to go I'm going to read a couple emails, John, and I'll go to you. An email here from Dave. I am a hunter and gun owner and fully support efforts to better regulate firearms. All of our constitutional rights have guardrails. We can't get the fire in a theater, and there's a clear need for better guardrails to advance of weapon technology in the 232 years since the Second Amendment, when the primary gun was a single-shot musket. Dave says, I am embarrassed to associate myself with the overzealous gun culture that will probably to restrict hunting and then a similar email from Reeve. I'm part of a group that is sometimes underrepresented in conversations about gun control, hunters and gun control and gun owners who are supportive of stricter gun control measures, including an assault weapon ban. I've enjoyed hunting since I was a kid and keep several guns at home. There is never, to my knowledge, been a proposed firearm regulation that would impinge on my ability to continue doing these things. I would much prefer to live in a society where high-capacity weapons designed to kill people are not widely and easily available. And John, we've got some others as well along the same lines. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? You were all broke up. Am I
we
coming
couldn't hear you
through okay?
very well.
Yeah.
Darn, can you all hear me?
Okay? Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Oh,
You sound
okay.
fine.
I think I'm out of this group. I think I'm the only one that lives in the Lewiston, Auburn area and has actually lived through this travesty. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah. So what we have is we have 2 emails from hunters who said they're very proud gun owners, but they also support guns to limit or restrict high capacity weapons designed to kill people, and believes those kind of guns should not be widely and easily available.
Okay. Am I on? Okay.
Yes.
Can we all agree that if the laws that are on the books now were followed, this never would have happened? Can we agree with that? So why are we even talking about more laws? This is what infuriates myself and a lot of people like me. Enforce the laws that are there now, but you're talking about putting in another laws. Doesn't make sense. This never should have happened. Never should have happened. You could talk all you want about the firearms, this, that, or anything else. The government themselves that come in here, the federal government has come in here and said they cannot come within 50 million firearms. How many firearms are in this country? But you want to go on and say you can't buy them anymore. We're way past that, guys. We're way past that. Enforce the laws that are on the books now. You'll see a lot better things. Lewiston never, ever should have happened. And talking about gun control, gun ban is simply wrong. Sorry.
We'll go to Merle, who's calling from Scarborough. Hi, Merle. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you? Well, I'm a deer hunter. I've been hunting deer for 60 years, and basically I only fire my gun every 2-3 years at a decent buck. And I hunted right up till the last gun was fired Saturday on the black powder. And I see no reason to have guns that shoot more than one bullet. That's all you need. As far as semi-automatic rifles up to 5 shots are okay, but when they start getting into this stuff with 30 rounds, I hear them shooting on the shooting range. Nobody should have guns like that unless they're a police officer or somebody like that. And I got dozens of guns, but I don't shoot a gun just every once in a great while. So come on, it just doesn't make sense that you should have be able to have these kind of guns that fire all these things. And I'm a darn good deer hunter, and I don't need a gun like that.
Merle, thank you.
That's like the
Go ahead. You hear that all the time. You're not in the minority.
That was the 3rd time, I think, maybe the 4th, that hunters have called in and said about having no problem, I guess, going to traditional hunting rifles. I would remind the listeners that under the Second Amendment, the courts have basically said that if the bad guy can have these types of firearms and they're in common use, then those individuals who want to defend themselves can have similar firearms. Now, we can talk all day long about whether we like that or don't like it. Hunters can say, I'm okay with giving up beyond 5 rounds. The 5-round issue is for conservation. I served 12 years as a legislator on the committee of jurisdiction on this matter. That's not a capacity issue, it's a conservation issue. But what we're talking about is distracting, I think, because it's not going anywhere, from all of those things that could make a difference. And that is just the world of 2023's politics, where we have these types of debates that are controversial. Again, for the listeners that are hunters out there, Our organization will be looking at the entire picture with nothing off the table. We will work with everyone that wants to work with us. And if we can connect it to this shooting or the Joseph Eaton shooting, we will work on it. But none of these gun laws that we're talking about would have made a difference in this Lewiston shooting. That's not to disrespect anyone. That's just the reality.
And Vicki, I want to ask you about that. I mean, the reality is, even if all guns were made illegal tomorrow, there are so many guns already out there that would any new legislation really make a difference?
No.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because one of the callers called in and commented on that we just have too many guns. And I did find a statistic that the New York Times had from back in 2017 that we made up 44% of the global population, the US, but we owned 42% of the guns. So we are.
I don't think you're saying that right. The US is not 44% of the global population.
Americans make up 44.4. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's more like it. Yeah. So we're 4%. 4% of
a very small percent of the population, but we owned almost half of the world's guns. So we do have, we're awash in guns in this culture. But to go back to what was saying there, I mean, gun violence is a bigger picture than just what we're talking about today. As we talked about before, it also involves suicide, intimate partner violence, and domestic violence. We just had a murder-suicide in the town near me, Searsmont, just a couple of weeks ago. And Maine is also a source state for other states who have stricter laws. Our weak laws are meaning that we are providing guns to other states and to those who want to trade in opioids. So
you know what? I have to wrap you up, and I have to wrap all of you all up. That's Vicki Dudera, state rep, co-chair of the Gun Safety Caucus. John Reed owns JT Reed's Gun Shop in Auburn, and David Trahan, executive director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. Today's sound engineer, Sandra Harris. We had help from Nick Godfrey and Nick Woodward. And thank you to Becky Stuckless for doing our interpretation. This is Maine Calling on Maine Public Radio.